going to be covering some cybersecurity headlines that have really hit the news real hard lately. Now, let's jump right into MGM. So MGM was taken completely offline on September 10th. System-wide outage at MGM Resorts all around the country, really, but primarily in Las Vegas, where the bulk of their business resides. They had to go back to things like cash only at restaurants. They couldn't do room charges. They couldn't take credit cards. Digital room keys stopped working. TVs went down. The phones went down. Websites went down. Casino machines went offline. I mean, it was like a nightmare scenario for them. Now, the big thing that we wanted to point out right away is that MGM was pretty upfront about exactly what happened inside their organization. Attackers had broken in, they had claimed to have stolen data, and then they had deployed ransomware across the network to take down the infrastructure that MGM relies on for normal day-to-day operation. Now, in the wake of all of the scattered and confusing news that came out about MGM and what had actually happened inside of their network, the hackers behind the attack actually stepped forward into the spotlight and gave us a rundown of what they had done inside the network. This is the Alpha V ransomware group. And again, if you paid attention to cybersecurity news recently, you have likely seen this name before. These guys are a prolific ransomware group. They're responsible for some high-profile hacks, and they have been devastating in the networks that they have been in. Now, Alpha V came out and said that they had stolen a bunch of data from the MGM network, and they had posted a link to download any and all data that had been exfiltrated on membership materials and internal information for the hotels and resort chain on their darknet website. This was up until September 12th. On September 13th, it came back down. Now, this to us normally indicates that there was some level of negotiation happening between the ransomware group and MGM specifically, but in this case, it does not appear that was the case. The attackers came back out and said, we still continue to have access to MGM's infrastructure. If a deal is not reached, we'll carry out additional attacks. And this seemed to be what they followed through on as they moved through the scenario. Now, MGM came out and gave a full disclosure on data theft. They said that they understand criminals obtained certain personal information belonging to some customers who transacted with MGM prior to March of 2019. They also got some employee information, including things like employee passwords, employee information, employee social security numbers, and the like. Not a good place to find yourself, and this was a massive loss of data. What's more, we are seeing some follow-on effects for this already. There's already been a warning about a class action lawsuit against MGM, and we've also seen, unknown if this is related, but we've also seen members of the MGM BetMGM service, their online gambling service, come out and say that their accounts have started to be empty. Now, we don't have any indication that this is 100% linked to the attacks against their network from the Alpha V crew, but the timing is somewhat suspicious. That being said, it could be something like those accounts specifically just got hacked in some other way and their account balance was stolen, but we'll stay tuned and see what actually ends up happening with this. Now, there was a pretty significant amount of financial damage that has already been reported by MGM from this attack specifically, and this comes from MGM's SEC 8K filing. This is new. We're seeing a lot of new information coming out with these SEC filings that we didn't get a couple of years back, mainly because the government has changed how reporting through the SEC actually functions. If you suspect a material incident has occurred within your network, something that will drastically impact your ability to function as an organization and you're a publicly traded company like MGM, then you've got 4 days to actually file a report with the SEC, and then these become public. Again, this is how we know as much as we do at this point. MGM overall is looking at about $100 million worth of loss because of this cyber attack specifically. About $10 million of that is from what we refer to as non-reoccurring fees. This is MGM hiring legal counsel, hiring a forensic investigator, and basically paying for the remediation of the attack itself. $10 million is no small chunk of change. Now, they do believe that their insurance will cover the vast majority of the impact here. So, I mean, I suppose on their end, that's good news, although their premiums are probably going to skyrocket. But the full scope and cost of this breach is unknown at this point, could not be determined, and that's a quote from MGM directly. So let's talk about how this actually happened. And this is being pieced together by a bunch of different news organizations who have shown to be a little bit more credible about the actual information they're reporting at this point. But Bloomberg went out and said that social engineering of the company's information technology help desk, which is a third-party provider, was likely the introduction to the network for the hackers at this point. And you can see the article that is sitting up from TechCrunch in the upper right-hand corner. A phone call to a help desk was likely all it took to hack MGM. Now, obviously, it's a little more complex than this once they get inside the network. It wasn't just a phone call and the entire casino went down. There's a lot more to it than that. But it gives you an idea of how they went in the first place. A former MGM employee has also come out under condition of anonymity and talked about MGM's cybersecurity policies. They stated that the help desk was vulnerable to attack. For something like a password reset and an MFA reset, which is what we believe happened in this case, all you really need to know is the employee's name, their employee ID number, and their date of birth. And a lot of this information is very easy to obtain with easy open source intelligence gathering tools. I mean, you can find a lot of that information just on social media if you know where to look for it. MGM was also using Okta, and Okta came out with another briefing on a similar style of attack vector that a lot of attackers have been using lately. We'll talk about that here in just a second, but you can see kind of where this is going. An MGM employee's information was compromised. Attackers were able to gain initial access, at the very least, into that network, likely through calling that help desk, having their MFA token reset, and having the password reset. In a lot of cases, especially if a network is not properly configured or secured on the inside, that small level of access can lead to something much, much bigger. If you've watched our webinar from Zero to Takeover, you've seen us go through an exact kind of scenario like this. Now, we want to bring this up as our kind of our first tip as we're talking about how to avoid cybersecurity scams and fraud. And the very first one, I know it's a broken record, but go with me on this: multi-factor authentication. And using a good kind of multi-factor authentication, not something just like SMS. We'll go through the different kinds here in just a second. But realistically, when we're talking about authentication, we're talking about how you verify you are who you say you are. And we do this in 3 levels normally: something you know, like a password; something you have, like an MFA key or something like that; and then something you are, like a biometric signature on your phone. And if you're using more than one, congratulations, you're now using MFA. It's that belt and suspenders approach to cybersecurity that we have preached so hard for the last couple of years. Microsoft has come out recently with some stats on business email compromise and cloud service compromise, and they're estimating that over 90% of the time these attacks can be stopped with things like multi-factor authentication. Basic security hygiene is really what it takes to secure your systems. Now, it's a little more complex than that, but again, we'll cover it as we go. Now, I mentioned Okta previously, and Okta came out with, and this came out in August, they came out with a report on what they call cross-tenant impersonation attacks. This appears to be what happened with both MGM and the Caesars Casino in Las Vegas, if you've been following. Both of those casino chains were hit with very, very similar ransomware attacks by the same group within about the same 2-week period. Looks like there's a lot of similarities there that we can glean off of here. But when Okta gave their case study on this, they basically lined out how this happened. An IT service desk is targeted. The goal is to reset multi-factor authentication and register the hacker's own device as the multi-factor pass. This is something that we've seen before. The other target here was Okta super administrators. Once they got access to an Okta super administrator account, that gave them access to pretty much all of the contents of the Okta vault. It also gave them access to their single sign-on service and a lot more. Now, this comes down to a trend that we've seen coming up recently, and that is the use of voice phishing, using just a standard phone call for a phishing attack. In fact, it's one of the things that we test when we do our social engineering experiments. We don't just send out emails to people and hope they click on them. We follow along with industry standards, and we'll follow up with a phone call. Studies show that if you follow up a phishing email with a phone call, you bump up your effectiveness rate by about 40%, which is substantial when we're talking about a way to break in and steal the data from your organization. Now, Okta's promised to come out with a little bit more information on this and some other types of strategies you can use to avoid situations like this. We'll bring those to you as they come out. But again, it was very interesting. Now, I mentioned before, we're piecing this together from a lot of different journalistic sources. And the reason I say that is because we're getting some conflicting information about how exactly the attack happened, the level of sophistication behind it, and what the potential stopgaps in security services were for MGM. VX Underground, who is a prominent group that reports on cybersecurity, malicious cybersecurity activity on Twitter, X, came out and posted this, and they said all Alpha V ransomware group did to compromise MGM Resorts was hop on LinkedIn, find an employee, and then call the help desk. A $33 billion company was defeated by a 10-minute conversation. Now, again, was it that simple? Probably not. But this is what journalists have been reporting, and this has really caused kind of a black eye from a public relations standpoint for MGM specifically. Now, when we're talking about scams involving phones, which is, again, how we believe this actually happened, there's a few things we need to talk about. First off, it is very easy to spoof caller ID. I'm sure anyone who has a cell phone who receives the litany of spam phone calls every day that I think most of us probably get at this point has noticed that a lot of times those spam phone calls seem to be coming from your specific area, or at least your area code. That's because spoofing a phone number is a trivially easy thing to do. There are free services out there that can do it. There are paid services. LMG specifically uses something like SpoofGuard when we do our phone social engineering, and it lets us set our phone number as really whatever we want it to be. Moving a little bit more into the technological advancements behind fraud, we're also seeing a big move towards voice cloning. And this is something that can be used again to fool your service desk. A lot of this is artificial intelligence backed. And in some cases, it only takes about 30 seconds worth of your voice as a recording to completely clone how you would talk. Something that is kind of frightening when we talk about voice verification with call centers, like when you call into your phone company, your cable company, or someone like that. They usually use your phone number and then your basic voice cues as a way to verify you. If something can mock that, or if something can impersonate that, that means they can bypass those security settings. If you want to check out how this works specifically, check out 11labs.io. They have a really interesting demonstration they can give you where it shows exactly how voice cloning functions inside their system. But it also leads to a bigger tip, and that is relying on strong caller verification. If you utilize something like a call center, where your employees or your customers have to call in, make sure that there are good ways for them to verify themselves with that call center. You can see the verify process sitting here. Also, consider using other tools like Okta in conjunction with those call centers to make sure that that you are covering yourself from a good baseline prior to allowing sensitive information to get out the door. You can also leverage advanced call fraud detection. Phone printing is what this used to be referred to as, and the terminology has shifted a little bit, but realistically it means the call center that you're working with looks at a few different things. It looks at the phone number you're calling in from, potentially the origin of the call, the device that you're using to call in, and then background noise when it hears it. In a lot of these cases, something like SpoofCard or some of the other spoofing software out there will allow you to input background noise to make it sound like you're somewhere that you're actually not. So you could be sitting in your living room and make it sound like you're in traffic or in a busy office building. Oftentimes, this can lend credibility when we're talking about why information needs to be put out the door. And if those are known audio patterns, then a phone printing service can identify those and make it a little bit more difficult for attackers to get in. We also want to talk about MFA bypass because, again, this was a significant portion of the MGM attack specifically. Microsoft has come out and warned, well, not to deaf ears, but they've been billowing about this for a while. Hackers are finding increasingly sophisticated ways to bypass multi-factor authentication. In a lot of cases, this can be something as simple as what's referred to as an MFA fatigue attack, where they just simply send you prompts to log into your account over and over and over and over again until you finally relent, get annoyed, and just hit approve. This happens in a lot of cases. In fact, we've noticed that in cases like Uber, and in other cases that have involved MFA bypass, that was the exact tactic that very sophisticated groups have used, simply just annoy you into letting them in the door. So again, make sure that your employees are trained on how to use multi-factor authentication appropriately and what to do if they feel like there is some kind of attack against their account.
Thank you so much, everyone. Again, my name is Matt Duran, Director of Training and Research for LMG Security. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out at any time. We would love to hear from you. You can reach me at info@lmgsecurity.com, find me on LinkedIn, or follow us on Twitter. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.